My name is Geraldine Thompson, and at 54 years old, I've learned that life's greatest plot twists often come in innocent-looking envelopes. The cream-colored invitation to my ex-husband Richard's engagement party sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I could bring myself to touch it again. 7 years after he left me for his younger paralegal, he wanted me to witness his happiness. What he didn't count on was my own journey since then. Before I tell you how I handled this situation, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to hear more stories about rising above life's challenges. I met Richard Blackwell at a charity auction when I was 29. I still remember the navy blue dress I wore that night, how the fabric swished around my knees as I moved between art displays. I was working as an art consultant for a small gallery, then passionate about connecting people with pieces that spoke to their souls. My dream was always to own my gallery someday, to create a space where art could transform lives the way it had transformed mine. Richard approached me as I was admiring a landscape, painting his opening line so charmingly confident that I couldn't help but smile. I'm not sure what's more beautiful, the artwork or the woman appreciating it. He had this magnetic presence, tall with warm brown eyes and a smile that crinkled the corners of those eyes. As an up-and-coming attorney at the prestigious Hamilton and Brooks law firm, he carried himself with the assurance of someone destined for greatness. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Richard wooed me with thoughtful gifts that showed he was paying attention, books by my favorite authors, tickets to exhibits I mentioned, wanting to see small sketches he'd commissioned from local artists. Within 6 months, we were engaged, and by our first anniversary, we were married in a garden ceremony that felt like something from a fairy tale. The early years of our marriage were beautiful. We bought a colonial-style house in a leafy suburb with a sunroom I converted into a small studio where I could work on my own art projects. Richard was climbing the ranks at his firm, and I continued working at the gallery, though I scaled back my hours to host dinner parties that would help advance his career. We were partners in building our life together, or at least that's what I believed. Richard's boss, James Thornton, was one of the founding partners at Hamilton and Brooks. Unlike the other partners, who were loud and boisterous at social gatherings, James was reserved, observant, with a quiet intelligence that commanded respect without demanding it. He was in his early 40s, then single, and often the subject of gossip about why such a successful, attractive man remained unmarried. When he came to our dinner parties, he was always polite, asking thoughtful questions about my art knowledge, and sometimes bringing vintage art books he thought I'd appreciate. The first hint of trouble in our marriage came in subtle ways. As Richard climbed higher at the firm, he became increasingly focused on appearances. The house wasn't prestigious enough. My car wasn't impressive enough. My clothing wasn't sophisticated enough for the wife of a man of his stature. I found myself slowly editing myself out of my own life, trying to fit his evolving vision. "Geraldine, couldn't you wear something more elegant than that?" became a common question before events. The other partners' wives all seemed to know how to present themselves. Little cuts small enough that complaining about them would seem petty, but deep enough that they left scars over time. By our 10th anniversary, I barely recognized myself. I'd put my own artistic aspirations on hold, working part-time at the gallery, only focusing instead on being the perfect corporate wife. I redecorated our home to his specifications, wore clothes he approved of, cultivated friendships with the people he needed to impress. The real distance between us grew as Richard approached 40. He started making comments about my appearance as I entered my 40s too. Nothing cruel at first, just observations. "You might want to try that new skin treatment Susan was talking about." Or, "Have you thought about coloring those gray hairs?" His late nights at the office became more frequent. I told myself it was the demands of making partner, but deep down, I knew something was changing. I suggested couples therapy. Richard went twice before declaring it a waste of time. I tried romantic getaways, new lingerie, cooking classes to spice up our dinner routine. Nothing bridged the growing gulf between us. By our 15th anniversary, we were living parallel lives under the same roof. I was desperately trying to save something that Richard had already decided wasn't worth saving. The day I discovered Richard's affair remains burned in my memory. It wasn't some dramatic confrontation or finding mysterious hotel receipts. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I had stopped by his office to drop off the watch he'd forgotten at home. His assistant wasn't at her desk, so I gently knocked on his door before opening it, expecting to see him hunched over to paperwork. Instead, I saw him with Natalie, his paralegal. Her blouse half unbuttoned his hands where they had no business being. They sprang apart when the door opened, but not quickly enough. Natalie was 28 with long blonde hair and the kind of dewy complexion that only youth provides. I stood frozen, the watch case still in my hand. "Geraldine," Richard said, not with guilt, but with irritation at being interrupted. "You should have called before coming by." That's when I knew. This wasn't a first-time indiscretion. This wasn't a mistake. This was an ongoing affair, and his primary concern was that I had discovered it inconveniently. I placed the watch on a side table, turned without a word, and walked out with whatever dignity I could muster. Richard didn't follow me. He called 3 hours later not to apologize, but to discuss how we would handle this situation, like it was a minor PR crisis, not the implosion of 16 years of marriage. I wanted to fight for our relationship, fool that I was. I suggested counseling again, asked for time to work through this together. Richard listened with the detached patience of someone humoring a child, then said words that shattered whatever was left of my heart. "Geraldine, I've been unhappy for years. Natalie makes me feel young again. She understands the man I want to be, not just the man I was." 2 weeks later, on the night of our anniversary, I made dinner at home, hoping against hope we could talk. Richard came home late, put his briefcase down, and announced he wanted a divorce. He didn't even sit down at the table where candles were melting over the untouched food. "I deserve to be happy," he said, as if happiness was a finite resource, and he couldn't have it while married to me. "You're not the woman I married anymore." The divorce was brutal. Richard had always handled our finances, and I discovered he'd been preparing for this moment, moving assets, documenting every perceived failure of mine. He wanted the house, claimed he deserved the larger portion of our investments because he had earned the money. He even tried to claim some of my personal art collection as joint property. It was James Thornton who quietly connected me with Patricia Winters, a divorce attorney known for her fierce protection of clients against vindictive spouses. I never knew exactly what James said to Richard at work, but suddenly Richard became more generous in the settlement, allowing me to keep my art, and a fair financial settlement, though not enough to maintain the lifestyle I'd grown accustomed to. The social fallout was perhaps even more painful than the financial one. Couples we'd been friends with for years suddenly had scheduling conflicts when I tried to make plans. I was no longer invited to charity events or gallery openings where I might run into Richard and Natalie. It was as if I had become invisible, my identity as Richard's wife being the only thing that had made me visible to our social circle in the first place. Richard didn't even have the decency to be discreet. Within a month of moving out, he and Natalie were appearing at all our old haunts. I heard from a sympathetic former friend that he was telling people I had let myself go, and he had tried to make it work. The narrative he created painted him as the long-suffering husband who had finally found happiness, and me as the bitter aging wife who couldn't keep his interest. I fell into a depression so deep I could barely function. I questioned everything about myself, my attractiveness, my worth, my identity. Who was I if not Richard's wife? What value did I have now that I was a middle-aged divorcee? I moved from our dream home to a small apartment that echoed with emptiness. Each morning, I woke up feeling like a failure, the weight of shame so heavy I could barely rise from bed. When you hit rock bottom, the strangest things can become lifelines. For me, it was running into Margot Pierce at the supermarket, my cart filled with microwave dinners and ice cream, my appearance so unkempt that I'd hoped to avoid seeing anyone I knew. Margot had been a friend from art school whom I'd lost touch with over the years of being Richard's wife. She owned a small but respected gallery across town and barely blinked at my disheveled state before inviting me for coffee. Sitting across from her in a cafe, Wearing no makeup and yesterday's clothes, I broke down and told her everything. You know what the worst part is? I confided, wiping tears with a napkin. I don't even know who I am anymore. I spent so many years being Richard's wife that I forgot how to be Geraldine. Margot reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Then it's time to remember. That conversation became my turning point. Margot offered me a part-time position at her gallery, not out of pity, but because she remembered my eye for emerging artists. The job paid poorly compared to what I was accustomed to, but it gave me purpose, a reason to shower and dress each morning, a place where I had value beyond my marital status. I found a therapist who specialized in life transitions and joined a support group for divorced women. There's something powerful about sitting in a circle with others who understand exactly what you're feeling. Women who also jumped when the phone rang, hoping it was their ex calling to say it had all been a terrible mistake. Women who also spent nights staring at the ceiling, rewriting the past, and wondering what they could have done differently. The first few months were about survival. Getting through each day without falling apart was victory enough. I learned to breathe through panic attacks in grocery store aisles when I saw Richard and Natalie shopping together. I practiced responses for when well-meaning acquaintances asked prying questions about the divorce. I forced myself to eat regular meals even when food tasted like cardboard. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, at first things began to change. Working at the gallery reconnected me with my passion for art. I started noticing beauty again in paintings and the changing seasons and the resilience of the women in my support group. I began keeping a sketchbook by my bed, drawing for the first time in years, not with any goal, but simply for the joy of creating. I made new friends through the gallery and reconnected with old ones who'd fallen away during my marriage. Women who invited me to book clubs and hiking groups, who didn't treat me like I was contagious, who saw value in me that had nothing to do with whose wife I had been. As my first post-divorce year ended, I made a decision to reclaim myself physically as well. Not to attract a new man or to show Richard what he had lost, but because I deserved to feel good in my skin. I found a haircut that suited my face rather than the conservative style Richard had preferred. I donated all the beige and navy clothes he had approved of and started wearing colors again. I joined a yoga class and discovered muscles I didn't know I had. Throughout this time, I was saving every penny I could, nurturing a dream I'd set aside decades earlier. I wanted my own gallery, a space that reflected my vision and values. It seemed impossible given my limited finances, but I created a business plan anyway, researching locations, crunching numbers late into the night. The call from James Thornton came out of the blue on a Tuesday morning. He wanted to know how I was doing, if I needed anything. It was such an unexpected kindness that I found myself inviting him for coffee, surprised when he accepted. Over lattes at a cafe near his office, James listened as I tentatively shared my gallery dream. I expected polite encouragement the kind people offer when they have no real interest. Instead, he asked detailed questions about my vision, my business model, my projected costs. I've been looking to diversify my investments, he said thoughtfully. The art market has always interested me, but I lack the expertise to navigate it properly. What would you think about a partnership, your knowledge and vision, my capital? I was stunned, speechless. When I found my voice, I asked why he would take such a risk on someone who had been out of the art world for so long. His answer still moves me when I think of it, because I've watched you at every dinner party and charity event for 16 years, Geraldine. I've seen your eyes light up when you talk about art in a way they never did when you talked about anything else. That passion and knowledge doesn't disappear just because circumstances change. 6 months later, Renaissance Gallery opened its doors. The name was my idea, a rebirth, a return to classics while embracing new beginnings. The space was smaller than I dreamed of, but perfect for my vision. Warm lighting and inviting layout that made art accessible rather than intimidating, a mix of established artists and emerging talents. James was a silent partner in the business sense, but became a friend and mentor as the gallery grew. He visited regularly, never interfering with my artistic direction, but offering solid business advice when asked. Under his guidance, I learned to read contracts properly, to negotiate with confidence, to see myself as a businesswoman as well as an art lover. The gallery thrived beyond my most optimistic projections. Within 3 years, we expanded to a larger space. By year 5, Renaissance was mentioned in regional art publications as a gallery to watch. I was finally standing on my own, both professionally and personally, when the invitation arrived. The invitation was cream-colored cardstock with embossed gold lettering announcing the engagement of Richard Blackwell and Natalie Peterson. The reception would be held at the Grand Meridian Hotel, the most exclusive venue in the city. A handwritten note in Richard's familiar script was tucked inside. Geraldine, I hope you can join us for this celebration. It would mean a lot to have your blessing after all this time. Richard. My first reaction was physical, a hollowness in my stomach, a tightness in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. I thought I was past this thought I had healed. Yet here I was, hands shaking, that old voice of insecurity whispering in my ear again. I called my closest friend Diana, who had stood by me through the worst of the divorce. He wants you there as a trophy, she said flatly when I read her the note. To show everyone how evolved and friendly he is while really showing off that he upgraded to a younger model while you're alone. Don't give him the satisfaction. Her words rang true, but something inside me rebelled at the idea of declining out of fear. Wasn't that letting him win in a different way? Staying away because I couldn't face seeing them together. What if I went and showed him that I'm thriving? I mused aloud. Diana sighed. And will you be bringing a handsome date to this emotional minefield? Because showing up alone, no matter how successful you are, plays into his narrative that you couldn't move on. That was the crux of it. In the 5 years since our divorce, I had dated occasionally, but found no one I connected with deeply. I had built a successful business, reclaimed my sense of self, created a beautiful new life, but I had done it alone. And in Richard's world, that would be seen as a failure. For days, I wavered between declining and accepting. I discussed it in my now monthly support group, where opinions were split. I meditated on it during morning yoga. I even made pro and con lists, like a teenager trying to make a decision about prom. Then came the business association luncheon, where I ran into Richard unexpectedly. I was there representing Renaissance Gallery. He was there with his firm. We quite literally bumped into each other at the refreshment table. Geraldine, he said, looking me over with that assessing gaze I once tried so hard to please. You look, well. Got my invitation, I hope. I did, I replied, proud of how steady my voice sounded. Congratulations to you both. We're going all out. He continued, stirring his coffee with unnecessary vigor. Top shelf everything. The firm's senior partners will all be there. James Thornton himself RSVP'd yes, which surprised everyone given how rarely he attends social functions. The subtle dig about my simple gallery, compared to his grand law firm connections, wasn't lost on me. Nor was the implied reminder of all I had left behind when our marriage ended. It would really complete the evening to have you there, he added, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Show everyone that we're all adults here, that the past is truly behind us. Walking back to my gallery after the luncheon, I felt a slow burn of determination building. Richard hadn't invited me to include me in his happiness. He'd invited me to showcase his own magnanimity while subtly reminding me of what he perceived as my failure. The fact that I hadn't remarried, that my life was smaller in scope than when I was with him, these were failures in his estimation, and he wanted witnesses to that comparison. The next day, I had a lunch meeting with James to discuss acquiring a collection from an estate sale. As we finished our business discussion, I hesitantly mentioned the invitation. I saw your name on the acceptance list, I said casually. I didn't realize you were close to Richard and Natalie. James set down his fork with deliberate care. I'm not. But as a senior partner, certain social obligations are expected. Are you planning to attend? I shared my conflicted feelings, surprised by how easily I opened up to him. James had become a friend over the years of our business partnership, but we rarely discuss personal matters this deeply. He's hoping I'll decline, I admitted. Or worse, that I'll come alone and confirm his narrative that I'm the sad ex-wife who never moved on while he built this perfect new life. James was quiet for a long moment, those observant eyes studying me with an intensity that made me nervously smooth my napkin. "What if you didn't go alone?" he finally asked. I considered asking a friend, but that seems transparent. "I meant with me," James clarified, his voice casual, but his eyes serious. "Not as your business partner or friend, but as your date." My heart skipped a beat, though I couldn't quite say why. James and I had developed a warm friendship over the years, but there had never been anything romantic between us. He was Richard's boss, 15 years my senior, and so far above my social circle that the idea seemed laughable. "Why would you do that?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. His smile was gentle, but held something I'd never noticed before. "Because Richard Blackwell is a good attorney, but not a good man. Because I've watched you rebuild your life with grace and determination when he tried to break you. And because, Geraldine, I've wanted to ask you to dinner, a real dinner, not a business meeting, for about 2 years now, but couldn't find the right moment." I stared at him, speechless. James Thornton, the founding partner worth millions respected throughout the legal community, wanted to date me. It seemed impossible. "You don't have to answer now," he continued, signaling for the check. "Think about it. If you decide you'd rather not attend at all, I completely understand. If you want to go alone, I admire your courage. But if you'd like company, I'd be honored to accompany you." That evening, I sat in my apartment looking at old photographs, not of Richard and me, but of myself before I met him. The young woman with dreams and ambitions who didn't need a man to validate her existence. Somewhere along the way, I'd lost her. The past 5 years had been about finding her again. Would going to this party with James be another form of using a man to define my worth? Or would it be two friends supporting each other through an awkward social obligation? And what about his surprising admission of interest? Was that genuine, or was he just being kind? After 3 days of consideration, I called James and accepted his offer. Whatever his motives, whatever happened at the party, I knew I would face it better with a friend by my side. The weeks before the engagement party took on a strange dreamlike quality. I found myself thinking about James differently, noticing things I had overlooked for years. The subtle humor in his comments, the respectful way he treated everyone from business associates to restaurant servers, the depth of knowledge he possessed about subjects beyond law. Finding the right dress became a mission. I wanted something that projected confidence and success without trying too hard, something age-appropriate but not matronly. After trying on what felt like hundreds of options, I found it a deep emerald silk that flowed beautifully and brought out the green in my hazel eyes. Not too formal, not too casual, and nothing like anything Richard had ever seen me wear. James and I met for dinner twice during those weeks, gradually shifting from our usual business discussions to more personal conversations. I learned about his childhood in a small town in Vermont, his passion for architectural restoration, his quiet philanthropic work that he never publicized. He asked thoughtful questions about my art, my dreams for the gallery's future, my favorite books and films. There was no dramatic declaration of feelings, no sudden passion, but something subtle was changing between us. A lingering glance here, a brush of hands there, a new awareness that hummed in the air when we were together. The night before the engagement party, we had dinner at an intimate restaurant far from our usual business haunts. James seemed unusually reflective, swirling his wine before setting it down untouched. "I should tell you something before tomorrow," he said, his normally confident voice hesitant. "I've never thought much of Richard Blackwell as a man. He's skillful at his job, certainly, but the way he treated you, it never sat right with me." I felt a flush of embarrassment. "You knew about the affair before it became public." "Not specifically, no, but I saw how he spoke to you at firm functions, how he became when he thought no important clients were watching. Small cruelties that spoke volumes about his character." He reached across the table, his fingers lightly touching mine. I remember a Christmas party must have been a year before your divorce. You had put so much effort into organizing that charity auction portion of the evening, and it raised a record amount. Richard took all the credit in his speech, never once mentioning your contribution. I saw your face when he did that just for a moment before you composed yourself. That's when I knew. Knew what? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. That he didn't deserve you. That anyone who could dim your light that way wasn't worthy of standing in it. He withdrew his hand, suddenly self-conscious. I apologize if that's too forward. I just wanted you to understand that tomorrow isn't just about helping you face Richard. It's about something I've wanted to do for a very long time. I drove home in a daze, his words replaying in my mind. Had James Thornton, the man who intimidated powerful attorneys and corporate CEOs, really been watching me all these years? Seeing me when I thought I was invisible? The morning of the engagement party dawned bright and clear, as if the universe itself refused to provide convenient rain to match my nervousness. I spent extra time on my appearance, not out of vanity, but as armor for the battle ahead. My hair now styled in soft layers that framed my face, rather than Richard's preferred sleek bob cooperated for once. The emerald dress fit perfectly. When I applied my lipstick, a bold red, I would never have worn during my marriage, I hardly recognized the confident woman in the mirror. James arrived exactly on time, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than a month's rent on my first apartment. He looked distinguished, powerful, and completely at ease. When he saw me, something in his expression made all my nervous preparations worthwhile. "Geraldine," he said simply, "you are absolutely breathtaking." The drive to the Grand Meridian Hotel passed in a blur of small talk and growing anticipation. As we pulled up to the valet stand, I felt panic rising. What was I doing here? Was this childish, trying to prove something to a man who had already moved on with his life? James must have sensed my distress because he reached over and took my hand. "We don't have to stay long," he assured me. "Just long enough to congratulate them, have one drink, and show that you've moved forward with dignity. And Geraldine," he squeezed my hand gently, "remember that you have nothing to prove to anyone, least of all Richard Blackwell." Taking a deep breath, I nodded. James came around to open my door, offered his arm, and together we walked into the Lion's Den. The Grand Meridian's ballroom was transformed for the engagement celebration with tasteful floral arrangements and soft lighting creating an atmosphere of romantic elegance. A string quartet played in the corner, and waitstaff circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. It was exactly the kind of understated luxury that Richard had always aspired to, beautiful, but with an awareness of its own importance. We hadn't taken 3 steps into the room before I felt the shift in energy. Heads turned, conversations paused, eyes widened in recognition. James Thornton rarely attended social functions, and never as someone's date. His presence alone would have caused a stir. His presence with me, Richard's ex-wife, created an immediate sensation. I spotted Richard across the room, his arm around Natalie's waist, as they greeted guests. He was as handsome as ever in his tailored suit, silver threading through his dark hair in a way that only enhanced his distinguished look. Natalie was stunning, in a champagne-colored dress that showcased her youth and beauty, her diamond engagement ring catching the light with every gesture. The moment Richard saw us, his practiced smile froze. I watched emotions flicker across his face in rapid succession: surprise, confusion, calculation, and finally, a tightening around his eyes that I recognized from our marriage as barely controlled anger. James placed his hand lightly at the small of my back, a gesture that was both protective and possessive. "Shall we congratulate the happy couple?" he suggested, his voice calm, but carrying an undercurrent of steel. We made our way across the room, accepting glasses of champagne from a passing server. I felt as if I were in a dream, or perhaps starring in a play where everyone knew their lines except me. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure others must hear it. Richard recovered quickly his lawyer's training, allowing him to mask his true feelings behind a veneer of cordiality. "Geraldine," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek with false warmth. I'm so glad you came. His eyes darted to James' confusion evident. And James, I had no idea you two would be coming together. Congratulations, Richard, I said, proud of how steady my voice sounded. The party is lovely. I turned to Natalie, who looked significantly more uncomfortable than her fiancé. And congratulations to you as well, Natalie. I wish you both happiness. James extended his hand to Richard. Congratulations, Blackwell. Quite an affair you've put together here. The double meaning wasn't lost on any of us. Natalie, clearly desperate to fill the awkward silence, jumped in. Thank you both for coming. It means so much to us, doesn't it, Richard and Mr. Thornton? It's an honor to have you here. Richard speaks so highly of you at the firm. Does he? James raised an eyebrow, his expression pleasant but his eyes sharp. How nice. And please call me James. After all, we're not at the office now. Richard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Geraldine, I didn't realize you and James were acquainted outside of firm functions. Before I could respond, James smoothly interjected, Geraldine and I have been close for some time now. Her gallery is doing remarkably well, a true renaissance in the local art scene. But then you always knew how talented she was, didn't you, Richard? The conversation continued in this vein, a masterclass in social manipulation. James praised my accomplishments, subtly highlighting what Richard had discarded. Richard tried repeatedly to reassert control, to position himself as the generous ex-husband who held no grudges. Natalie watched with growing unease as the undercurrents became impossible to ignore. After what seemed an appropriate amount of time, James suggested we mingle with the other guests. As we moved away, I caught Richard's eyes following us, his expression dark with thoughts I couldn't and didn't want to read. The next hour was a surreal experience in social navigation. Former friends who had abandoned me after the divorce suddenly found me fascinating now that I was on James Thornton's arm. Law firm colleagues who had avoided eye contact for years now approached with warm greetings. I recognized the hypocrisy, but found I no longer cared about their approval or rejection. James never left my side, his hand occasionally touching my back or arm in a way that felt both protective and intimate. We fell into an easy rhythm, finishing each other's sentences, laughing at the same subtle absurdities. Anyone watching would assume we had been together for years. The dinner portion of the evening arrived with assigned seating that placed James and me at a table with several of Richard's colleagues and their spouses. As we took our seats, I noticed Richard watching from the head table, his expression unreadable, but his attention unmistakable. During the meal, one of the senior partner's wives leaned toward me conspiratorially. I always thought you got the raw end of that divorce, dear, she said, her voice lowered, but not enough. But seeing you with James tonight, well, perhaps things work out as they should. I smiled noncommittally, uncomfortable with the implication that my worth was still being measured by the man at my side. James, overhearing, smoothly changed the subject to ask about the woman's recent trip to Italy, a kindness I appreciated more than I could express. After dinner came the traditional toasts. Richard's best man spoke first, telling sanitized stories of their friendship and ending with wishes for the couple's happiness. Natalie's maid of honor followed with a tearful speech about finding true love. Then Richard himself stood, champagne in hand, every inch the confident attorney addressing a jury. He thanked everyone for coming, spoke about new beginnings and second chances, and then his eyes found mine in the crowd. I'm particularly grateful, he said, his voice carrying clearly in the hushed room, for the presence of those from my past who have shown such grace in celebrating my future. It takes a special kind of strength to witness others' happiness when your own path has been more solitary. The implication was clear, the barb thinly veiled. Several guests glanced my way, expressions ranging from sympathy to morbid curiosity. I felt my cheeks burning, the old shame threatening to resurface. Before I could process my reaction, James was on his feet, champagne glass raised. He hadn't been on the list of speakers, but his position in the firm guaranteed him the floor. If I might add my congratulations, he began, his rich voice commanding immediate attention. New beginnings are indeed worth celebrating, as are the journeys that lead us to them. Richard and Natalie are starting their chapter together, which we all toast tonight. He turned slightly, his gaze finding me with warmth that made my breath catch. And some of us are fortunate enough to witness remarkable transformations in those we admire. To watch someone rebuild from devastation, creating beauty and success through their own vision and determination, that is truly something to celebrate. He raised his glass higher. To Richard and Natalie, and to the unexpected paths that lead us where we're meant to be. The room raised their glasses with a murmur of agreement, but I barely noticed. I was looking at James, seeing him with a new clarity. This wasn't just an act of kindness or a favor to a friend. The emotion in his eyes when he looked at me was real. After the toasts, Richard made his way to our table, his expression tight with controlled anger. "Geraldine, might I have a word?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. "In private." James's eyes met mine, silently asking if I wanted his intervention. I squeezed his hand reassuringly and rose to follow Richard to a quiet corner of the ballroom. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Richard hissed once we were alone. "Showing up with James Thornton? Is this some kind of revenge play?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt a strange sense of clarity. This man had once been the center of my world. I had measured my worth by his approval, shaped my life to fit his expectations. Now, he seemed smaller somehow, his anger petty rather than intimidating. "Not everything is about you, Richard," I said quietly. "James asked me to accompany him, and I accepted because I enjoy his company." "Enjoy his company?" Richard repeated incredulously. "He's my boss, Geraldine. Do you have any idea how this looks? Everyone is talking, wondering if you were involved with him during our marriage." "Then everyone is wrong," I replied evenly. "But I don't particularly care what they think anymore. That's the difference between the woman I was when we were married and the woman I am now." Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice further. "This is my engagement party, my celebration with my future wife. And you show up with the one man in the room with more power and money than anyone else, making a spectacle." "I came because you invited me," I interrupted, my voice still calm. "I came wishing you genuine happiness with Natalie. The fact that I'm here with James has nothing to do with you or your engagement." "Bullshit," he spat, his facade cracking. "You've been planning this, waiting for the perfect moment to show up and make me look foolish." I shook my head, surprised to find I felt more pity than anger. "Richard, I spent years planning my life around making you look good. I have no interest in making you look foolish now. That's not why I'm here." "Then why are you here? To show off that you've somehow managed to snag my boss to prove something?" "I'm here for closure," I said simply. "To see with my own eyes that the chapter of my life that included you is truly finished. And it is. Whatever power you still thought you held over me is gone." He stared at me, disbelief warring with anger in his expression. "So James Thornton is just a convenient escort for this personal growth moment. Does he know that James is someone who sees me for who I really am?" I replied. "Something you never did, and that's all I'm going to say on the matter." I turned to walk away, but Richard grabbed my wrist harder than was necessary. "Don't think for a minute that he's serious about you. Men like James don't marry gallery owners from the suburbs. You're a novelty to him, nothing more." I looked pointedly at his hand until he released me. "Goodbye, Richard. I wish you and Natalie every happiness." As I walked back toward our table, I saw James watching, concern evident in his posture. The string quartet had begun playing again, couples moving to the small dance floor. Without hesitation, I walked directly to him and held out my hand. "Dance with me." He took my hand without question, leading me to the dance floor with the natural grace that characterized everything he did. As his arm encircled my waist, I felt a sense of safety and rightness I hadn't experienced in years. "Everything all right?" he asked softly, his breath warm against my ear. "Better than all right," I assured him. For the first time in 7 years, I feel completely free. As we moved together to the music, I was acutely aware of eyes on us, Richard's burning gaze, Natalie's confused glances, the speculative looks of the other guests. But for once, I didn't care what anyone thought. In James's arms, with his eyes looking at me with unmistakable admiration, I felt beautiful and valued in a way that had nothing to do with anyone else's opinion. Across the room, Richard was speaking intensely to Natalie, whose expression shifted from confusion to anger. She pulled away from him, saying something sharp before walking briskly toward the ladies' room. Richard's face, flushed with either embarrassment or rage, stalked to the bar and ordered what appeared to be a straight whiskey. "I think," James murmured, noticing the direction of my gaze, "that the carefully orchestrated evening isn't going according to plan." I turned my attention back to him, to the warmth in his eyes and the solid presence of his arms around me. "Then we've stayed long enough to be polite. Would you mind terribly if we left?" His smile was answer enough. As the dance ended, he offered his arm, and we made our way toward the exit, stopping only to thank our host as courtesy demanded. Richard was nowhere to be seen. Natalie, composed, but with reddened eyes, accepted our thanks with a brittle smile. "I'm sorry if our presence caused any discomfort," I said sincerely. She looked at me with unexpected directness. "It wasn't you," she said quietly, "though I'm beginning to understand some things better now." As James and I walked out into the cool evening air, I felt as if I were leaving behind more than just an uncomfortable social event. I was leaving the last vestiges of a life defined by someone else's expectations, someone else's vision of who I should be. James handed the valet his ticket, then turned to me with a questioning look. "Would you like me to take you home? Or perhaps we could find a quieter place for a nightcap." "A nightcap sounds perfect," I replied, feeling lighter than I had in years. "I think we have some things to talk about." His smile, warm, genuine, with none of the calculation I had grown accustomed to seeing in Richard's, made my heart skip. "Yes," he agreed, "I believe we do." The drive from the Grand Meridian to a small, elegant jazz club James knew was filled with a charged silence, neither of us quite ready to put into words what had transpired between us at the party. As we settled into a quiet corner booth, soft saxophone notes creating a cocoon of privacy around us, I finally gave voice to what I'd been thinking. "Thank you for tonight," I said, tracing the rim of my wine glass. "What you did with that toast, standing up for me that way, no one's done anything like that for me in a very long time." James' expression was serious, his eyes holding mine. "I meant every word. Your transformation these past years has been remarkable. You've built something beautiful from the ashes he left behind." "With your help," I reminded him. He shook his head slightly. "Financial backing is the easy part. The vision, the determination, the daily work of rebuilding, that was all you, Geraldine." We talked for hours, the kind of deep, meandering conversation that loses all sense of time. James told me about his own failed marriage years ago to a woman who had been more interested in his money than in him. I shared stories from the early days of my gallery, the mistakes and small triumphs. We discovered shared tastes in books and music, a mutual love for historic architecture, a similar sense of humor. When he finally drove me home, walking me to my door with old-fashioned courtesy, there was a moment of hesitation. We both felt the shift in our relationship, but were unsure how to navigate it. "Richard said something tonight." I admitted, keys in hand but making no move to unlock my door. "He said you wouldn't be serious about someone like me, that I was just a novelty." James's expression hardened briefly before softening into something tender. Richard Blackwell has never understood what's truly valuable in this world. He stepped closer, one hand gently touching my cheek. "May I?" At my nod, he leaned in and kissed me. Not a passionate declaration or a tentative question, but a kiss that felt like coming home to a place I'd never been before. When we parted, both slightly breathless, his smile held a touch of wonder. "I've wanted to do that for longer than I care to admit," he confessed. "I'm glad you finally did," I replied, surprised by my own boldness. "And I hope you'll do it again, soon." In the weeks that followed, the social ripples from the engagement party spread throughout Richard's firm and our wider circle. I heard from mutual acquaintances that Richard had made a scene after we left drinking too much and publicly accusing Natalie of flirting with a colleague. James, ever discreet, never mentioned any workplace fallout, but I noticed Richard was conspicuously absent from the team, handling a high-profile case that would have normally been his to lead. The firm's annual performance reviews came shortly after, and James casually mentioned that he had promoted another attorney over Richard for the newly opened junior partner position. A matter of temperament and judgment was all he said on the subject, but the timing wasn't lost on me. My gallery flourished with several new clients who had attended the engagement party and discovered Renaissance for the first time. One particularly wealthy collector mentioned that she had always thought Richard treated you abominably dear while purchasing a significant piece from a new artist I was featuring. James and I took things slowly, both of us having been burned by past relationships and cautious about the complexity of our connection. He visited the gallery often, sometimes bringing lunch, and sitting in my small office discussing everything from art movements to current events. I attended occasional firm functions as his guest, aware of the speculative glances, but no longer bothered by them. 6 months after the engagement party, I heard through the grapevine that Richard and Natalie's relationship was struggling. The wedding date had been postponed twice, and they had been seen arguing publicly at restaurants. I found to my surprise that the news brought me no satisfaction. Whatever karma Richard was experiencing was his own to process, and I no longer needed his unhappiness to validate my own journey. My own happiness, meanwhile, continued to unfold in unexpected ways. James and I grew closer, our relationship deepening from mutual respect to genuine love. He supported my independence fiercely, never trying to control my gallery decisions or suggesting I change to fit his world. Instead, he seemed to delight in my uniqueness and the very things Richard had tried to suppress. A year after that fateful engagement party, James proposed during a weekend trip to Vermont in a restored colonial farmhouse he had secretly purchased and renovated based on casual comments I'd made about my dream home. It wasn't a flashy proposal with grand gestures, just a simple question asked with absolute sincerity while we sat on the porch watching the sunset. "This house needs art," he said, holding my hand. "And I need you. Will you marry me, Geraldine? Not because either of us is incomplete alone, but because I love the life we could build together." Our wedding was small and intimate, held in the sculpture garden behind my gallery with only our closest friends in attendance. I wore a simple dress in deep blue rather than traditional white, symbolizing the wisdom that comes from life's experiences rather than the innocence of youth. During our honeymoon in Italy, visiting the art museums I had always dreamed of seeing, I received a text from Diana with a local society page link. Richard and Natalie had finally married in a small civil ceremony, nothing like the grand wedding they had once planned. The accompanying photo showed them both looking strained, their smiles not reaching their eyes. I showed it to James as we sat at an outdoor cafe in Florence. "Are you feeling anything about this?" he asked carefully, always sensitive to the complex emotions tied to my past. I considered the question seriously, looking out over the ancient city where generations had loved and lost and found their way forward. "I feel sad for them," I said finally. "Sad that Richard never learned that real love isn't about appearances or status or control. Sad that Natalie is starting a marriage that's already damaged by those values." James took my hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on my palm. "And what about you? What has Geraldine Thornton learned about real love?" The question made me smile, both at the still new surname and at the depth of what I had discovered in the years since my divorce. "That it starts with loving yourself enough to know your worth," I replied. "That it's found in mutual respect and admiration, not in trying to mold each other into idealized versions. That it can arrive unexpectedly in the middle of life when you've stopped looking for it and started building something meaningful on your own." Looking back now, I can see how every painful step of my journey was necessary to bring me where I am today. The divorce that once seemed like the end of everything became the beginning of something far more authentic. The gallery that began as a reclamation of my dreams became a thriving business that connects artists with those who appreciate their vision. And James, who started as a business partner and became my greatest champion, continues to be the kind of partner I never knew could exist. The greatest lesson I've learned is that rock bottom can become the foundation for a life more beautiful than you ever imagined possible. Not because someone rescued me, but because falling apart completely allowed me to rebuild with intention to choose carefully what and who would be part of my new life. I no longer believe in fairy tale endings or Prince Charming rescues. I believe in the power of a woman who discovers her own strength, who learns that her value isn't determined by someone else's ability to see it. I believe in second chances that come not from finding the right person, but from becoming the right person for yourself first. If you're watching this and facing your own version of rock bottom, whether from divorce, betrayal, or any other loss that feels like it might break, you know this. The breaking is not the end of your story. It might just be the necessary beginning of the life you were always meant to live. Thank you for listening to my journey. I'd love to hear in the comments if you've experienced a similar transformation or how you found strength after heartbreak. Please like and subscribe if my story resonated with you, and share it with someone who might need to hear that their broken places can become the foundation of something beautiful. Remember, sometimes the things we think are failures are actually redirections to a far better destination than we could have imagined.